The snow came down the morning we buried Helen, the kind of heavy, silent snow that muffles everything, footsteps, voices, even grief. I remember standing at the graveside thinking the whole world had gone quiet, like it was holding its breath along with me. 41 years. 41 years I had shared a bed, a kitchen table, a life with that woman, and now I was standing in a black coat that felt 3 sizes too big, watching them lower her into the frozen ground while my son Derek stood beside me checking his phone. I noticed it, but I said nothing. That was the first mistake I made. My name is Walter. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a structural engineer for the city of Columbus, Ohio, and I built a good life, not a flashy one, not the kind you see in magazines, but a solid one. Helen and I had a house on Clemens Drive that we paid off in 2009. We had a modest investment portfolio, a rental property on the east side of town, and a small manufacturing business I had started 15 years ago with 2 partners who had since retired and sold me their shares. By the time Helen passed, the business was worth somewhere around $4 million. Nothing that would make headlines, but enough. More than enough for 2 people who had never needed much to be happy. Derek knew about the money, of course. He had always known. Since he was a teenager, he had that particular kind of awareness about him, the way certain people in a room always seem to know where the food is, where the exits are, and who has the largest inheritance coming to them. I had told myself for years that it was just ambition, that it was drive, that it was something I should be proud of in a son. Helen had seen it differently. Derek doesn't love money, Walter, she told me once, maybe 5 years before she got sick. He loves what money means. And that's a different thing entirely. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I did now. Sandra, my daughter-in-law, had been standing at the graveside too, but she wasn't the type to look sad in public unless it served a purpose. She had this way of arranging her face into whatever expression the moment seemed to require, and at Helen's funeral the expression was composed, sorrow tasteful, minimal, the grief of someone who had somewhere to be afterward. She was 38. Sharp in the way that a kitchen knife is sharp, efficient and cold and useful only for cutting. It was on the drive back from the cemetery, before we had even reached the highway, that she leaned forward from the back seat and said it. We should probably schedule the meeting with the attorney soon, Walter, just to get everything organized. There's no sense letting things sit. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. The snow was still coming down. My wife was buried 40 minutes ago, I said. I know, and I'm sorry. I just think Helen would have wanted things handled properly. She smiled at me then, a small, efficient smile, the kind you give a child when you're explaining something you consider obvious. She was always so organized. I turned my eyes back to the road and said nothing. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. The house on Clemens Drive, which had always felt exactly the right size for 2 people, now felt enormous in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. I would wake at 3 in the morning and reach across to Helen's side of the bed before I remembered. I would start sentences in empty rooms. I would make 2 cups of coffee out of habit and then stand in the kitchen holding both of them, not knowing what to do with my hands. Derek and Sandra began coming around more frequently. This should have been a comfort. It was not. They came with casseroles and concerned expressions and questions about the business. Derek had never shown the slightest interest in the manufacturing company while I was running it, and Helen was alive. But now he began asking to look at the books, suggesting he could help with operations, mentioning casually at first, then less casually, that he had some contacts in private equity who might want to have a conversation. I'm not interested in selling, I said one evening. We were sitting in my living room. Sandra had positioned herself near the window the way she always did, slightly outside the main conversation, observing. Dad, you're 67. You just lost Mom. You shouldn't be under this kind of stress. I enjoy the business, Derek. It gives me something to do. But for how long? You should be thinking about the future. Your future. He leaned forward in his chair. Our future. There it was. I heard Helen's voice in my head. He loves what money means. I said I was tired and I showed them out. It was around this time that I noticed other things changing. My car keys would be moved from where I always kept them. My reading glasses would turn up in rooms I hadn't been in. One evening I came downstairs to find Sandra in my study, standing near my desk, and when I asked what she was doing, she said she had been looking for a pen. There were pens in a cup on the desk, 3 inches from where her hand had been resting on a file folder. Small things, individually meaningless. Together they had a shape. Then came the morning. Derek sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and in a tone that was almost kind, almost gentle, said that he and Sandra had been talking, that they were worried about me, that I had seemed forgetful lately, confused, that I had said some things recently that didn't quite track. He mentioned an incident 2 weeks earlier when I had apparently told Sandra that I needed to call my mother who had been dead for 20 years. I had no memory of saying this. That was the thing that frightened me. Not the accusation itself, but the small, cold space of doubt it opened up, just for a moment, before I closed it. I don't know what you're suggesting, I said carefully. I'm not suggesting anything. I just think it might be worth seeing Dr. Pressler. Just to check in. For peace of mind. Sandra was in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I called Dr. Pressler myself that afternoon. I had been his patient for 11 years. He knew me, knew my history, knew Helen. I explained what Derek had said. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Walter, I saw you 3 months ago for your annual physical. Your cognitive scores were excellent. I have no clinical concerns whatsoever." He paused. "Is there something going on at home?" "I'm starting to wonder," I said. "I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who moves quickly. Helen used to tease me about it, the way I would sit with a problem for days, weeks sometimes, turning it over quietly before I acted. She called it patience. I think she was right. I have seen too many men, good men, react to situations with their chests puffed out and their voices raised and accomplish nothing except to put their opponents on guard. I had spent 32 years building structures designed to hold weight without cracking. I understood the value of quiet strength, so I did not confront Derek. I did not change my locks or hire a lawyer or call my brother in Pittsburgh. What I did, in early March, about 6 weeks after Helen's funeral, was make a phone call to a man I had known for 25 years. His name was Roy. He had been an investigator with the Columbus Police Department before he retired, and he now ran a small security consulting firm. I had done some structural work on his office building years ago, and we had stayed in touch. "I need some help," I told him. "What kind?" "The quiet kind." Roy came to the house on a Tuesday while Derek and Sandra were both at work. He walked through the rooms with a small device that looked like a transistor radio, and in the study, my study, the room where I kept financial records, and the safe that held the original copies of my will and trust documents, he found 2 things. One was a small listening device, barely larger than a button, attached to the underside of my desk. The other was a tiny camera, no bigger than a shirt button, embedded in the smoke detector near the bookcase. I sat down in my chair when he showed me. My hands were steady. I was surprised to find that I was not surprised. "How long?" I asked. "Hard to say. Could be weeks. Could be longer." Roy looked at me with the steady eyes of a man who had seen most of what people are capable of. "Walter, whatever they were looking for in here, there's a real chance they found it. The safe, the will, the trust structure." I understood then what had been happening. They had been studying me, my habits, my documents, my state of mind, building a case, brick by quiet brick, that I was losing my faculties. And if they could establish that, if they could find a sympathetic doctor or manufacture enough doubt, then a challenge to the trust structure I had built with my attorney 12 years ago became not just possible but plausible. Helen had always said I was the most prepared person she had ever known. I hope she was right about that too. That same Tuesday, I drove to the office of my attorney, a woman named Patricia Hale who had handled my affairs for 15 years and who I trusted completely. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. When I finished, she looked up. "Have they made any explicit demands? Any direct statements about the business or the estate?" "Not yet. Not in those words. But the intent is clear." "Yes." She set down her pen. "All right. Here's what we're going to do. What we did took 8 weeks. I will not describe every step because some of it is not my story to tell and some of it involved people I don't want to name here. But the short version is this. Patricia restructured the trust. The business was moved into a new entity. An independent neuropsychologist, one chosen by Patricia, not by me, not by Derek, evaluated me thoroughly over 3 sessions and produced a written assessment that documented, in clinical language that would hold up in any court, that I was of sound mind, excellent cognitive function, and entirely competent to manage my own affairs. During those 8 weeks, I played the role I had apparently been cast in. I let Derek continue to believe his plan was working. I allowed Sandra to bring her casseroles and her careful questions. When Derek mentioned the private equity contacts again, I nodded vaguely and said I would think about it. When Sandra suggested, with elaborate casualness, that it might make sense for them to have signing authority on one of my accounts, just in case, I said I'd mention it to Patricia. There was one evening during this period that I nearly cracked. Derek had stopped by unannounced, his habit now, and found me in the backyard, in the garden that Helen and I had kept together for 30 years. I was just sitting there on the old bench we'd bought at a yard sale in 2003, and I had been crying, which I hadn't let myself do much of in front of other people since the funeral. Derek came and sat beside me. For a few minutes he was just my son, not the man I had been watching with careful eyes for weeks. Just my boy. The one I had taught to ride a bike in this same yard, who had called me from college the night his first girlfriend broke his heart. He put his hand on my shoulder, and for a moment I thought, maybe I have misread this. Maybe I am the one who is wrong. Then he said, Dad, you should let me and Sandra take care of things. You shouldn't have to carry all this alone. And I remembered the camera and the smoke detector. I patted his hand and said I was all right. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in May. Derek had arranged it, or believed he had, presenting it to me as a routine review of the estate documents. Something sensible and practical and considerate. Patricia would be there, he said, and he had suggested that a colleague of his, a financial advisor named Garrett something, might also sit in. I said that was fine. What Derek did not know was that Roy had spent the previous 3 weeks documenting a chain of contact between Sandra and a probate attorney in a firm across town, one who specialized, as Roy put it with characteristic understatement, in capacity challenges. He also did not know that Patricia had quietly arranged for the independent neuropsychologist to be available by phone, and he did not know about Marcus. Marcus was 22 years old. He had come to work for me at the business about a year before Helen got sick, hired initially as a warehouse assistant. Over the 4 years since then, he had become something more than an employee to me. He was sharp, hardworking, and had the kind of quiet integrity that I recognized because Helen had always told me I had it too. He had grown up in the foster system, in and out of homes from the age of 6, and there was a particular kind of steadiness in him that I think comes from learning early that you can only count on yourself. Helen had adored him. She used to bring him lunch on the days he worked late. When Helen died, Marcus had been the first person from the business to come to the house. He had sat with me for 3 hours and hadn't tried to fill the silence with words, which was the right thing to do and which most people don't understand. In the months since, he had quietly become the person I trusted most in my daily life. He drove me to doctor's appointments when I let him. He noticed when I hadn't eaten. I had made certain decisions about Marcus. I had discussed them with Patricia. I had not discussed them with Derek. The Thursday of the meeting was warm, one of those May days in Ohio that feel like a gift after the long gray winter. I dressed carefully. Blue jacket, the one Helen had given me for my 65th birthday. I arrived at Patricia's office 10 minutes early, and she met me in the lobby. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 8 weeks," I said. Derek and Sandra arrived together. Derek in a suit, which he rarely wore. Sandra in something gray and professional, her hair done, a leather portfolio under her arm as though this were a board meeting she had prepared for. The financial advisor, Garrett, was a soft-faced man in his 40s who shook my hand and said he was glad to finally meet me, which struck me as an odd thing to say to someone you have never met. He glanced at Sandra when he said it. We sat around the conference table. Patricia sat at the head. I sat beside her. Derek and Sandra sat across from me with Garrett between them like a prop. Derek began. He had clearly rehearsed. He spoke about his concern for my well-being, the complexity of the estate, the stress of running a business at my age and in my condition. He used the phrase "my condition" twice, before Patricia interrupted him quietly and asked him to clarify what he meant by that. Derek looked momentarily uncomfortable. Then Sandra reached into the leather portfolio and produced a document. She set it on the table and slid it across to Patricia. "We have a statement from Dr. Norman Feld," Sandra said, "a geriatric psychiatrist, who evaluated Walter 2 weeks ago and has some significant concerns about his cognitive state." I looked at the document. I did not pick it up. "I was not evaluated by any Dr. Feld 2 weeks ago," I said. "Dad." "Derek." My voice was quiet. "I was not evaluated by any Dr. Feld 2 weeks ago. I have not seen any physician other than my own doctor, Pressler, and the neuropsychologist retained by Patricia's office, who I am happy to discuss." I looked at Sandra. "I'd be very interested to know how Dr. Feld conducted his evaluation." Sandra's expression didn't change. She was good. I'll give her that. Patricia had been writing something on her notepad. Without looking up, she said, "I'd also like to know, since we're establishing context. But perhaps first, we should address the question of these." She reached into her own folder and placed 2 photographs on the table. Enlarged, printed on standard paper but clear enough. The listening device. The camera. Derek looked at the photographs. The color left his face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. "These were discovered in my client's study on March 11th, Patricia said, by a licensed security professional. Both devices were collecting audio and video from a room containing private financial and legal documents. I have the full technical report, the chain of custody documentation, and the name of the firm that manufactures these particular devices, which are not consumer products." She folded her hands. "I also have a record of 11 communications between your office, Sandra, and a probate attorney at Whitfield and Associates between February 28th and April 4th of this year. I can provide dates and durations." Sandra's hand, I noticed, had moved to close the leather portfolio. "Now," Patricia said, "I'd like to outline the current structure of Walter's estate, which was revised in March and is fully executed and notarized, so that we're all working from the same information." What happened next took about 40 minutes. I will summarize it plainly, because the numbers matter less than what they meant. The business was now held in a trust structured in a way that was, as Patricia explained in the calm voice she reserved for situations she had completely under control, not subject to any capacity challenge without evidence of fraud at the time of signing evidence that did not exist, because there was no fraud. The rental property had been transferred, the investment accounts had been reorganized. Derek was named as a beneficiary, as he always had been, with a specific and reasonable inheritance. But the business and the decisions about its future were not his. Derek sat across from me looking like a man watching a building he had planned to demolish turn out to be built from reinforced concrete. "This is not what we discussed," he said. He was looking at me, not Patricia. "You and I never discussed any of this, Derek. You discussed it with Sandra, and with Garrett, and apparently with Dr. Feld, whoever he is. But you never sat down with me as my son and had an honest conversation about what you wanted. You chose a different approach." I paused. "I'm sorry about that. Genuinely. I am sorry that you thought it was necessary." "Dad, I'm not angry with you. This was true. The strange thing, sitting across from my son in that conference room in May, was that I was not angry. I was sad in a way that went below anger, the way deep water is below surface waves. I want you to understand something. Your mother loved you. I love you. That does not change. But I will not be managed. I will not be maneuvered or documented into irrelevance in my own life. I built what I built. I get to decide what happens to it." Sandra was staring at the table. Garrett had not spoken since the photographs appeared. "There is one more thing," Patricia said. She opened her folder again. Marcus came in. He had been waiting in the lobby, and Patricia's assistant had gone to get him. He came in wearing a jacket and tie, looking slightly uncomfortable in both, and he sat down in the chair Patricia indicated beside me. "Walter has formalized a decision regarding Marcus Tate," Patricia said. "Marcus has been named as an equity partner in the business, a 25% stake, transferred effective last month. He has also been designated as Walter's primary healthcare proxy and power of attorney, should Walter's health ever require it, with the full documentation and safeguards that designation requires." Derek looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him steadily, without hostility, the way he looked at most things. "He's not family," Sandra said. It was the first thing she had said in 20 minutes. "He's the person I trust," I said. "He has earned that. And frankly, it's not your determination to make." She looked at me then with something I recognized because I had seen it in the rearview mirror 5 months ago at the cemetery. The calculation, the rapid internal accounting. What is the cost here? What is the angle? Is there still a move to make? There wasn't. The meeting ended. Patricia showed them out. Garrett left without shaking my hand. Sandra walked past me without a word. Derek paused at the door. He looked older to me suddenly, diminished in some way that I hadn't anticipated and that didn't give me any satisfaction. He was still my son. He was still the boy who called me from college with a broken heart. "I don't understand why she got to you," he said. "Sandra, I mean, why you let her change who you are." He left before I could answer. I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes after they were gone. The May light came through the windows and lay across the table in long rectangles, warm and ordinary. I thought about Helen, the way I always thought about her, not as an absence, not as a loss, but as a presence that had simply shifted its location, the way a room feels like a person after they've left it. I thought about what she had told me, a week before she died, in the hospital room on the 4th floor with the view of the parking structure. She had been very weak by then, but her mind had been entirely clear, the way it always had been, sharp and particular and kind. She had taken my hand and said, "Don't let them make you small, Walter. You are not a small man. Don't let anyone talk you into thinking otherwise." I had not understood completely at the time. I understood now. Marcus was waiting in the lobby when I came out. He stood up when he saw me, jacket still slightly awkward on his shoulders, and there was something in his face that I recognized, the look of someone who is not quite sure yet that the good thing is real, who is waiting for it to be taken back. I had seen that look on him before, when I first offered him the manager's role at the business 2 years ago. It was the look of a person who has learned to be careful with hope. "It's done?" he asked. "It's done." He let out a slow breath. "I want you to know, Walter, the partnership, the proxy designation, I know what that means. I'm not going to let you down." "I know that," I said. "I've known it for 4 years." We walked out into the May afternoon together. The parking lot was warm, the sky that particular blue that only comes in the Midwest in May, vast and unqualified. On the way to his car, Marcus mentioned that he had been looking at some structural issues with the East Side rental property and had a contractor he wanted to recommend, someone with good rates, reliable. I told him to set up the meeting. We drove separately to the diner on 5th Avenue where I had eaten lunch with Helen every Friday for 15 years, and Marcus had a piece of pie and I had a cup of coffee, and we sat in the booth by the window and talked about the business for an hour. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would look like much from the outside, just a 67-year-old man and a 22-year-old sitting at a table in Columbus, Ohio on a Thursday in May, making plans. But I will tell you what it felt like. It felt like building something. It felt like foundation work. The unglamorous, necessary kind. The kind that goes underground and out of sight and holds everything above it up for 30 years. It felt like the right use of an afternoon. I drove home to the house on Clemens Drive in the early evening. The garden was coming in now. The perennials Helen had planted returning the way they always did, reliable and unhurried and indifferent to what the winter had been like. I walked through it for a while before I went inside, touching the tops of things the way she used to, cataloging what was coming up, what still needed attention. I had some calls to make. Roy, to close out the security work. Dr. Pressler, to update him. My brother in Pittsburgh, who I had been neglecting since February and who deserved a long conversation. I had grocery shopping to do and a board meeting Thursday week and a meeting with the contractor Marcus was setting up. I had things to do. That was not a small thing. I went inside and made coffee 1 cup this time and stood at the kitchen window watching the light go out of the garden. The house was quiet. It was always going to be quiet now. But quiet and empty were not the same thing, I had learned. Quiet could be full of something. Quiet could be the sound of a life that still had weight to it, structure, load-bearing walls. I drank my coffee. I thought about Helen. I thought, I am not done yet. Not even close.